Alrighty, today we're going to dig into the nervous system so that we can determine the parts that make it up and so we can see how it organized and break it down a little bit further. The nervous system is one of the more complex systems of a living organism. It controls all of your body, and that's kind of hard to do, so that's why it's a little bit more complex and has more parts to it. It describes how you move your arm and how your heart pumps blood through your body to keep you alive. This system happens whether you think about it, whether you don't think about it. It just automatically happens sometimes. It contains multiple subsets and it keeps branching and branching into different areas, as you can see with this diagram. Just branches and then branches and branches. So there are two main parts of the nervous system, the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. To start off, we're going to start by talking about the central nervous system, which from this diagram you can tell it breaks down into the brain, spinal cord, and then further into the cerebrum, cerebellum, brainstem, diencephalon, and then medulla, pons, midbrain, thalamus, and hypothalamus. So the main two parts that it consists of are the brain and the spinal cord. And then we're going to break down the brain even further first. The brain breaks down into the cerebrum, which is this whole part, the cerebellum, which is right here, the brainstem, which is right here, and then the diencephalon. And we're gonna go into the diencephalon, which is the hypothalamus and the thalamus. The hypothalamus controls and regulates your body temperature, your appetite, how you sleep, and it affects how your emotions affect your body. And then the thalamus directs sensory impulses to the cerebrum right here. The cerebrum is probably the most biggest part of the brain. It has 4 different lobes: the occipital lobe, the parietal lobe, the frontal lobe, and the temporal lobe. It also splits into the right and left hemispheres, which you can't see from this picture, but it's just right down the middle. And then we have the cerebellum, which is in the back of your brain by your brainstem. And the cerebellum is what helps keep you balanced and helps with muscle coordination. And then we have the brainstem, which we break down into the medulla, pons, and midbrain. The midbrain is responsible for eye and auditory reflexes. The pons is responsible for reflex actions like chewing, saliva production, and tasting. And then the medulla regulates swallowing, sneezing, coughing, heart and vessel functions, and your blood pressure. The other part of the central nervous system is the spinal cord, which we can break down into 4 different parts. It's the cervical, thoracic, lumbar, and then it has peripheral nerves, which are the efferent and efferent nerves. The efferent nerves carry information from the body to the brain, and then the efferent nerves carry information from the brain to the body. The spinal cord is kind of just the link between the brain and the rest of the nerves in the body, so it's a channel mostly. And then the other part of the nervous system would be the peripheral nervous system, which is kind of just everything else that's not the central nervous system. It's like the tiny nerves. It's mostly focused on communication in the body. And then the peripheral nervous system also breaks down. It breaks down into sensory and motor neurons. The motor neurons are what sends directions to your brain, to your muscles. And then the sensory is what picks up the stimuli that allows this to happen, like a spider going on your arm so you can brush it off or freak out. This is where the motor system then breaks down into the autonomic and somatic system, which is voluntary and involuntary. The somatic system is the voluntary system. which is what helps with skeletal movement, allows you to move your arm, signals to your brain, from your brain go to your arm saying move it. And the autonomic is involuntary, which is what allows us to breathe. We don't ever have to think about it, it just automatically happens so you can stay living. And then the autonomic breaks down even further into the parasympathetic and sympathetic. The sympathetic is the part of the nervous system that causes you to freak out, panic, and cause a frenzy. And then the parasympathetic is what calms your nerves down and allows you to calm down. It's basically the fight or flight instinct that you have. And then, now that we've talked about the organization of the nervous system and the key systems it breaks into, we're going to talk about the neuron, which is the basic building block of the entire nervous system. Both of the systems have this. Neurons are not able to divide, so once they are gone, they can't come back. And they all have the same basic cell structure, which is pictured right here. They have the cell body, also known as the soma, and then they have these branch-like features, which are the dendrites. And the dendrites are what picks up messages from other cells and transfers it back to the cell body. And then they also transport electrical impulses to other parts of the body and to other cells. So that's what makes us shoot impulses to other nerves and gets us moving. And then there are 3 types of neurons. There are the motor neuron and sensory neuron, which we already talked about, which we'll just review that a little bit. The motor neuron is what moves impulses from the central nervous system to the rest of the body, and then the sensory neurons are what moves impulses from sensory receptors to the brain and spinal cord. And then there are also the inner neurons that transfer impulses between the sensory and motor neurons. And that's basically the nervous system. So to review, we talked about the organization, how there are 2 main subsets, the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system, which further break down. The central nervous system has the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system has sensory neurons and the motor neurons. And then we have the brain that breaks down even further into the parietal lobe, frontal lobe, occipital lobe, and temporal lobe. And the main thing that we need to know is that the nervous system is the control system of the body, and that the neuron is the basic building block of the nervous system. And that is it.